What is going on, you guys? So in this video, you're gonna learn the wealth secrets from the wealthiest people that have ever walked this earth, and what they've done to build their wealth and what they've done to lose everything. I'm talking about Cornelius Vanderbilt, $300 billion fortune to flat zero. His family is penniless today. How do you do that? 2.5 times wealthier than Jeff Bezos, and Bezos right now is looking to buy a house. He was looking at houses at $225 million listing price. That's some real money. But today, there's a lot more competition. So you can go to the store, there's a million different stores you can buy from, and there's Amazon, they had market share. But regardless, you're talking about John D. Rockefeller, who essentially ran the country. Vanderbilt, who was pretty much handling the transportation of everything in the country. These are real powerful men. And I've learned a lot from these men. And I've been studying them for a while. And the why I'm studying them is because I want to learn how they see the world. I want to learn the mistakes that they've made. And this is going to help me essentially become more successful. And it's going to help me reach my long-term goals. And my long-term goal, one of them, is to not at the end of my life just leave a little bit of money to a little bit of property, a little bit of something. It's to actually build something. Think about it. We work so damn hard, 50, 60, 70 hours a week. And most of the time, people get to retirement, they have nothing to show for it. Maybe a couple properties or something small. And the reason being, I think, for the most part, is that people are short-sighted. Maybe they'll think 6 months, a year, 2 years out. They'll think of vacation next year. They're not thinking about the family legacy. They're not thinking about stuff like that. In today's world, everybody wants to be successful. Everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. So I think we're going to get a lot of great takeaways by studying these men. And I think ultimately, some of this could possibly alter and change your entire life, the way that you see the world. So looking at someone like Cornelius Vanderbilt, started from nothing. He was a street fighter, aggressive by personality and just nature. He borrowed $100 and he bought one boat. He turned that one boat into a fleet of boats because he believed that transportation via boat was the only way, the best way, and he built a monopoly. But then he was very smart because he realized that railway transportation, it was shaved down the travel time by days. So like perishable goods, all that stuff was sent faster, sent quicker, and it was cheaper to send it. So what ended up happening was he sold everything. He sold it all and put everything into railway, which is genius, and it takes a lot of guts to do it because a lot of people wouldn't do that. They have one thing that's going well, then to say, you know what, this no longer is the best use of my time. I'm better off going here. A lot of times I'll study CEOs and founders and people that have done great things, and what I see is that they get so tunnel vision on being right that they don't want to question if there's another way that they could do things that would be smarter. So that's what he did. He got into railways, and he was really trying to groom his son William, which is smart, and a lot of really successful people do that, is they want to groom their children to also be successful. But what happened was he had 10 kids. One of them died in the war. He had William, and then he had 8 daughters. So William was really where he wanted to spend a lot of his time, really kind of nurturing him to take over everything. And he sent William in to negotiate a deal with his competitors because they had the only access point into New York. So he went there and said, you know what, you guys can go into the city, just give us 200 grand. Give us 200 grand and you can go into the city. And they laughed in his face. And instead of holding his guns and saying 200 grand, he said, okay, how about 100,000? Desperately. And then all that did was make him look pathetic. And they questioned the backbone of Vanderbilt. So what Vanderbilt did when he found out this happened, he put armed guards at the bridge. Wouldn't let anyone pass, which is genius. And why would you? Why would you let competitors come into your market if you don't have to? So he did that, and then what ended up happening was all of his competitors fled to the stock market to sell. They wanted to sell their stock, and what did Vanderbilt do? He waited for rock bottom pricing, went bought everything. And by doing so, he owned 40% of the railway. 40% of the railway. That's incredible. 40% of America's transportation. So what he ended up then doing was realizing, you know what, the railways are getting overbuilt. This is another really bold move. Realizing that, you know, the peak of what was is no longer going to continue in this direction. Time to restructure, re-strategize, think bigger and think smarter. So what he did was he realized the money was in transporting. So he reached out to Rockefeller, John D. Rockefeller, and he's like, hey, why don't we do a deal? I'll transport your kerosene, but you have to really bring a lot more kerosene to market than you're currently doing to where it makes sense, but I'll do it at a discount. And so Rockefeller said, we have a deal. They shook hands, and Rockefeller really just skyrocketed, became super successful now that he's able to transport his kerosene everywhere. And then what happened was that Vanderbilt's arch nemesis, Tom Scott, reached out to Rockefeller and said, you know what, the rates are good, but not half as good as if you partnered with me instead. We cut Vanderbilt out. So they said, that sounds good. So they ended up doing the deal together. They cut out Vanderbilt. Then Vanderbilt said, you know what, I'm going to remove emotion. This is also what smart businessmen do and businesswomen do. Remove emotion. Why don't we talk together? And why don't we set the price for Rockefeller? We'll tell him what he pays. And so they attempted to do that. And then Rockefeller says, you know what, screw both of you. I'm just going to build pipelines. I don't even need you guys. And by doing so, he created one of the biggest recessions because most of the cargo was his refined oil. And then what he did was it shut the stock market down for 10 days. It was huge. It was like a Great Depression type of recession. And none of his competitors had the money to kind of wait it out in the kerosene industry. So they were going bankrupt. He went and he swallowed up all of his competitors for the most part. At the end, he owned 98% of the kerosene market, became the richest person in the world. But not before Vanderbilt became the richest person in the world. So Vanderbilt was worth $300 billion at the time of his death, which was right around the Great Depression era. So then what Tom Scott did was say, look, all right, you win, but if you want to access New York to transport your kerosene into New York, these are the rates. And so Rockefeller looked at the rates. They were way inflated. He said, screw it, I'm not doing the deal. And Tom Scott said, well, what options do you have? You got to pay. And so he said, fine. Shut down all of his refineries. He shut down all the refineries. He had the money. He said, okay, screw it. I'm not gonna do business there anymore. And what ended up happening was Tom Scott had to lay off thousands of workers, and the workers went on strike, and they destroyed 39 plants that Tom Scott built. The large facilities, 39 of them. Then 1,200 rail cars, they destroyed them all. It ruined Tom Scott. It absolutely ruined him. And to make matters even worse, Tom Scott, he had a protege. He was mentoring someone named Andrew Carnegie. And Andrew was 12 when he started working with him. And he kind of raised Carnegie up, and Carnegie always was very envious and very angry at Rockefeller for really dismantling and destroying Tom Scott's name in such a fashion. So then what ended up happening, now Rockefeller is cornering 98% of the kerosene market, and his Standard Oil business, he gets divided in 1911. 1911, it gets divided, uber successful. There's some estimates it's close to $400 billion net worth. Bezos is probably like 120 million. This guy's almost three times the net worth of Bezos. But what he does that's really smart is he's planning 100 years out. He's planning 100 years, 150, 200 years out with their money. And Rockefeller also had a very good plan. And he was very, very charitable. People don't know this about Rockefeller. He was an aggressive businessman. But he's also starting female colleges. And this is way, way before this would ever be considered. This was like in the late 1800s. He was starting female colleges. He was donating. He would go to African-American churches and leave large donations. A very charitable guy. But he believed deep in his gut that God sent him on this earth to do this, to really generate and build a tremendous net worth to give back. But what he ended up doing was he laid out his family's fortune, the trust, in such a way to where they were paying almost no tax. And if he would have done it the traditional way, they would have paid 70% taxes on his death. 70%. So they set up a family office, and they really live off of interest. They're worth $11 billion today on the low end. And this family office, they bring in other wealthy families. They charge them a commission. And they're very family oriented. They meet twice a year. They're out of the tabloids. They're not living this really wealthy, flamboyant type of lifestyle in front of everybody. They're tight-knit. And I think one of the reasons that it is because the business was divided in 1911. A lot of the times when there's a business in the family, people fight over how the business should be run. Who should have what power, who should have what title, who should make X, who should make Y. But they really had it set up in a way to where they're going to stretch this out another 100 years, their money. And that's incredible to do. Whereas the Vanderbilts, they lost everything. The Rockefellers, David Rockefeller, an offspring, self-made billionaire. So he did it without them. He was basically the highest official at Chase Manhattan Bank. Chase Manhattan Bank, which is the largest depository in the world. And self-made billionaire because of it. Like that's what family values really can do. If you raise your family right, you do it right, then you raise people that are wanting to contribute to the world, wanting to contribute value rather than sucking value out of the world. Whereas that's exactly what the Vanderbilts did. They went from contributing great value to sucking out great value. They bought 5 mansions on Fifth Avenue, all these custom homes all over the world, and they blew through $300 billion in less than 100 years. They had a family reunion in 1973 with 120 members. Not one of them was even a millionaire. How do you do that? $300 billion? I mean, this is a concern for really anyone that is ambitious. It's like, how do you not make those mistakes? And really the best way not to make that mistake is raising your family with the right values, focusing in on value creation, not getting sucked into like the Rolexes and that lifestyle, the penthouses, the private jets and all that stuff. That's all kind of a show and it doesn't really matter. The only thing that really matters is like creating value for that market, for your marketplace. The more people you can help, the more people that benefit from you existing, the more successful you're going to be, just point blank. And that's what the Vanderbilts lost. Once Cornelius died, nobody else really did anything except one person, Anderson Cooper, CNN. He founded his own way. He found his own way. And the way that he did that, though, is he broke into an event. He filmed this event, sold the contents of that video, and built his way up. Now he's making several $1 million a year, wildly successful for his industry. But he did it on his own. So what I suggest to you is if you want to be very, very successful, if you want to achieve great things in your life, I think the best thing to do is say, how can my efforts today matter 50 years from now, 100 years from now? What can I do today that's actually going to matter after a year or two? Because sometimes it's so easy to get sucked up into wanting to do this year. This year, next year, that's all short-sighted. Really having those long-term ambitious goals with a bunch of steps that are going to likely lead you in that direction, and then making sure it doesn't all fall apart on the way. And so learning a lot from Rockefeller can really help you, because for me, I look around at everyone and I don't see many families today that are still wealthy that created wealth 50 years ago, 100 years ago, because the world just gets more and more expensive. And so having great wealth today, it's much easier, especially if you have divisions in family, much easier to deplete those resources quickly. So with all that said, I hope that you've learned a lot about how to preserve great capital and then also how not to lose it. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you.